Hey, it's Tim, and I know a lot of you out there want to help support the show besides buying through the links and stuff on our show notes and our website and stuff, and we appreciate that. One thing you can do is to help our advertising partners at Libsyn better understand who our audience is. And if you could just go to this little website and fill out a couple of quick questions about your background and your age and gender and all that kind of stuff, they'll have a better sense of what kind of advertisers might be most appropriate for this here little show. We appreciate that. And the site is survey.libsyn, that's L-I-B as in boy, S-Y-N as in Nancy.com/good seats still available. Again, that's survey.libsyn, Libsyn.com/good seats still available. It's a cinch to do. It'll take you all of 5 seconds, and we appreciate it. And now, here's our show.
The history of rock and roll moves on now with a collage of the number one records of 1978.
Baby, come back. You can blame it all on me. Love is higher than a mountain. Love is bigger than water. Too little, too late. You're the one that I want. Shadow dancing. I've been sleeping all alone. Lord, I'll miss you 3 times a lady. This is the way we are feeling. Get down, boogie, boogie, boogie. I wanna kiss you all over. Hot child in the city. You need me because one is melting in the dark. You don't bring me flowers. Freak out. Listen, session, freak out.
The number one songs of 1978.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, dust off your leisure suits and hold on to your pet rocks, everybody. It's Tim Hanlon. It's Good Seats Still Available. It's the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. You have come to the right place. Thank you for finding us. And yes, it's 1978 all over again. That's the dulcet tones of Bill Drake, radio legend, co-founder, writer, producer of the History of Rock and Roll series you may have heard over the many years on syndicated radio. And a little montage, if you will, of the complete set of number one songs to reach the pinnacle of the Billboard Hot 100 chart in 1978. Usually, we'd try to put in a Casey Kasem montage of that. But for you AT40 aficionados out there, you'll remember that his montages, which were sort of a hallmark of their year-end shows that he did, he stopped doing those in 1977. So, had to find another source for it, but thank you to the History of Rock and Roll and Mr. Drake for that. But we want to put you in a mood, so let's get those black lights turned on and the sort of the vibe of the late 70s, and let's sort of get into that mood because we're going to be talking about baseball in 1978 specifically with our guest this week, David Krell, who, as you can imagine, has a great new book out on the topic. A nice interspersed, overlapping concentric circles of baseball and America in the disco era. That's the subtitle of the book. 1978 is where we're going, and let's think back now on what was on television in 1978. Happy Days, big deal, right back in the day. It was also the year or the season that Robin Williams had his little guest appearance on Happy Days, and that begat perhaps the most bizarre spinoffs in all of TV sitcom history with Mork and Mindy the following season. The first casino launched in Atlantic City. Remember when that was going to be sort of the Las Vegas of the East Coast? At the box office, when we actually went to movies, things like Grease and American Hot Wax, Superman, the original, with Christopher Reeve, were on the screens that we were going to, and there just was a ton going on. The Bee Gees, obviously, dominating the charts and keeping us occupied while we were waiting in line to get gas. whether it was an odd or even numbered license plate or whatever flag was hanging out there in those Jimmy Carter years. Boy, what memories. And baseball and sports generally did not disappoint, but in baseball particularly, what a season. I mean, so many memorable events. You had Pete Rose's 44-game hitting streak that year. Amazing. Tom Seaver's only career no-hitter was in 1978. Gaylord Perry threw his 3,000th strikeout, an amazing feat right there. And let's see, Willie McCovey had his 500th home run. Did I said that already? And yeah, but I don't think anybody would mistake what the true top story in baseball in 1978 was. And whether you lived in the New York metropolitan area or not, you had to admit that the New York Yankees were that story, and definitely a spillover from the crazy victory in the 1977 World Series, the 3 home run game with, from Reggie Jackson, and the Bronx burning in the background on ABC with Howard Cosell calling both simultaneously. But it spilled over to 1978 in amazing fashion. And you could not script it any better. And many books have been written about just that alone. But 3 managers, count them, under George Steinbrenner at the time, Billy Martin and Dick Hauser for one game, and Bob Lemon. And despite all that craziness, they finished with a record of 100 wins and 63 losses. It's just an amazing feat because the Yankees were 14 games behind the Boston Red Sox late in the season. We're talking like in August of 1978. And the margin was 3.5 games even on the September 16th weekend. And the Yankees won and swept that series with the Red Sox. And essentially what happened was they tied at the end of the season. And as happens when 2 teams are tied, a 1-game playoff. And on October 2nd, 1978, perhaps the most memorable 1-game playoff in modern baseball history was played. And we'll play a clip for you later from one of the 6 different broadcasts of that game. I'll tell you about that in a second. Of Bucky Dent, an unlikely hero, hitting a 3-run home run in the top of the 7th inning at Fenway Park, and an amazing game that lives on and obviously sent the Yankees into the American League Championship Series and then on to another World Series title in 1978. But we're getting into all of that stuff and more with our guest this week, David Krell. And I do mention again, you have to remember the media space in 1978. There were literally 6 different broadcasts, 3 television broadcasts and 3 simultaneous radio broadcasts. So if you were in New York or in Boston, you had a chance to watch the game on 2 different channels and 2 different broadcasts. And on radio, you could listen to 2 different radio stations, 2 different calls. Crazy as it might seem. On the national front on television, ABC had the game with Keith Jackson and Don Drysdale. In New York, you had WPIX with Phil Rizzuto, Frank Messer, and Bill White, who also swapped out along with Fran Healy on the radio side. The 4 of them just circled through. So that was on the radio side too. And WSBK in Boston, one of the original cable superstations with Ken Harrelson and Dick Stockton. So you had 3 different TV broadcasts of that game. So you couldn't miss it. And on radio, you couldn't miss it either. New York had WINS radio with the guys I just mentioned, WITS in Boston with Ned Martin and Jim Woods, and CBS Network Radio with Win Elliott and Ernie Harwell calling the game. So this was a big deal, and it was all over the media. And I think that probably helps perhaps elevate maybe the importance and the burnishing of the memory of that game. And again, if you weren't in New York or Boston, you still couldn't avoid this game. It was that dramatic. And that's probably more the exclamation point for a crazy year, a rollicking good time. And we're going to try to relive some of that with you in our conversation with David. And again, the name of his new book is called Baseball and America in the Disco Era, 1978. It is published by our friends at the University of Nebraska Press. And depending on when you're listening to this episode, so we're dropping this on March 31st. And If you're listening to it in real time today, Monday, it is available for pre-order wherever you get good books. If you're listening to it on April Fool's Day, the next day, April 1st, and beyond, it is available right this very moment. Either way, get it. Don't wait. Go get it. And we appreciate it if you get it through our website and get us some shekels of referral love from our friends at Amazon when you do so. Just go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You just search up this episode numbered 388 with David Krell and yours truly. And you'll find a couple of convenient links there for I think it's the hardcover and or the Kindle versions. And Amazon, of course, will get it to you as quickly as humanly possible. All right, so let's sit back. Let's put on your mood ring, turn up that Saturday Night Fever soundtrack in the background, and let's listen now to a wonderful conversation as we go back to 1978 with David Krell. Let's talk about it. As always, please enjoy. Give our audience a little bit of background on you and the adjunct to this story that we're going to be talking about.
Well, I grew up in Springfield, New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and I have vivid memories of 1978, primarily the blizzard that blanketed our area in February. And at that time, the baseball season seemed like it was years away, not weeks away. I remember the 78 season primarily because of Pete Rose's hitting streak. It dominated sports news. And then, of course, you had the Yankees coming back against the Boston Red Sox, the Boston Massacre, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and then the Bucky Dent home run at Fenway Park in the one-game playoff. Then they go on to defeat the Dodgers. And it was just a miraculous season. And when I probed a little further, Tim, I noticed Tom Seaver had his no-hitter that year. And Gaylord Perry had his 3,000th strikeout that year. And then I started reading about the Dodgers and learned that there was some conflict in the clubhouse with Don Sutton and Steve Garvey. That was also the year Steve Garvey got the middle school named after him. So complement that with popular culture, which I love, and you had one of the best years for Hollywood: Grease, Animal House, Superman, Hooper, Jaws 2, Halloween, and so on. And of course, television in a 3-network universe, Happy Days was at the top of the list. And Robin Williams guest starred as Mork from Ork and brought the house down. The cast still talks about it. So I went back on YouTube and got some interviews, got some quotes from interviews that I saw, and went to the Paley Center to screen the episode, remembering that I saw it when I was 11. I'm sorry,
this episode was what? A Saturday Night Live?
No, this was Happy Days.
Happy Days. I'm sorry. That's right. When he came in as his character. Yeah.
Because Gary Marshall's son was a Star Wars fan and said Richie should meet an alien or something to that effect. And they came up with the idea that it would be an alien that would be in a dream at the end of that episode, at the end of the original episode.
Yeah, a preposterous proposition.
Right. So at the end of the original episode, as it aired, Robin Williams appears as a driver who's lost. It was a dream. It was Richie's dream. Then it was such a popular episode that ABC, of course, says spinoff. So they give Robin Williams Mork and Mindy, and in syndication, they filmed another ending to the episode where Mork comes back and you're not really sure if it's a dream. So they kind of retconned it for syndication and continuity. I got a chance to relive some great childhood moments by going through the archives, going through microfilm, going on newspapers.com and ProQuest, watching games on YouTube, watching TV shows and movies, and reading the reviews of the movies. And it was such a pivotal year. I couldn't believe that no one had done it. I couldn't believe that this year hadn't been chronicled. You have 1977, 1976, 1921, 1956, 1957. I did a book about 1962. I did another one about 1966. No one had chronicled this. And Tim, I must confess, this project began about 12 years ago in a writing workshop. But I started to get involved in other projects. And in between a couple of these projects, I was looking around and I said, you know what? I have that 78 proposal from the workshop. Let me go through it. And a lot had to be changed. I gutted a lot of it. I trimmed it. I reworked the summary so it was more baseball oriented. I reworked the marketing plan and the biography and so forth for the proposal and sent it to Nebraska. And to my delight, they said yes.
How old were you in 1978?
I turned 11.
Okay, so we're roughly the same age, and I grew up also in northern New Jersey, a little town called Hohokus, just north of where you're talking about.
Right.
And I remember vividly, right, some of those Yankee, that late 70s Yankee sort of era. My first ever baseball game was, God bless them, a Cub Scouts trip to the new Yankee Stadium where, to save money, we went into the bleachers. And it was circa 1977 bleachers, even in a new stadium in the South Bronx. Quite an adventure. And Patriots, all of those Cub Scout leaders were. I don't think they know how brave they were. But there was a time in New York, right, where the Yankees were not unlike the stadium itself, kind of a renaissance, a reinvention, a new kind of direction after certainly years ahead before that.
Well, sure.
Not so great, right?
Well, they were in a drought since the 64 World Series loss to the Cardinals. Steinbrenner and his group by the Yankees in 73. In 76, they go back to the World Series, get swept by the Reds. Signed Reggie Jackson in the offseason. 77, they beat the Dodgers. Reggie hits 3 home runs in one game in the World Series. So things look good in 78. But when you're a kid and you're starting to read the sports pages, because it's about 10, 11, 12, when you start to want a little bit more, you want to be more informed. You want to learn about the stories that are going on behind the scenes and become more educated. At least that's how it was for me. But when you're reading in the Star Ledger about drama in the clubhouse, no other teams have this. It's unheard of. Players griping, players wanting to be traded, players wanting to leave because of the drama. And then Billy Martin leaving midway through the season. Billy Martin, he loves being a Yankee. And we know that from the Old Timers Day games. And we know that from Phil Rizzuto, who was calling the games on WPIX. And Rizzuto had that continuity to the teams of the 50s. And he would always be telling a Mickey Mantle story, a Billy Martin story on the air. There was something very magical about that. So when you lose Martin and you lose that history, that legacy, that continuity, as a kid, you're wondering what the heck is going on with this team.
How do you prevent, though? So, all right. So that's the background. And now we know where you are geographically and maybe psychologically. But how do you prevent this effort from being a Yankees story in 1978 versus all of baseball?
Oh, well, the Yankees certainly provide the through line because of the comeback and then the AL East playoff against the Red Sox. That's undeniable. But when I looked through the year in baseball, Tom Seaver's no-hitter, well, that deserves more than a mention. That deserves a discussion. The Sutton-Garvey conflict, Gaylord Perry, Pete Rose being, unhappy in Cincinnati, for lack of a better word, going to Philadelphia after the season. That certainly was a big story. And I forgot how many teams were vying for him. I mean, I think there were 8 different teams that he could have gone to. And I'm reading these articles saying, I have to put more about Pete Rose. I have to put more about the Reds. I have to put more about this conflict. I have to put more about Rose going to Philadelphia, mentioning that they won this series in 1980, largely because of him, and wondering why the Reds wouldn't pony up the money. Sparky Lyle with the Bronx Zoo, and then Sparky Anderson leaving the Reds. These were big stories. So the Yankees certainly had the backbone of this book, but there were so many other sub stories that deserved mention. That's how I prevented it from being solely about the New York Yankees.
All right. Well, let's put it also in perspective too, because this is also set against the larger tableau of the hell's going on in the world and certainly in the United States in 1978, right?
Right.
Jimmy Carter, president, disco, all the rage,
Right.
or becoming more mainstream. And the 70s in general were just sort of this very tortuous time for the United States in terms of understanding what it is, where it's going, who's going to govern it, and but also colorful and just wildly, especially in retrospect, right? Which I'm guilty of, so I'll throw it out there. Just so polychromatic, right? On so many different levels that it's just my kids don't even sort of fathom half of this stuff. Like they quiz me on like some of the music and the songs and that kind of stuff. Like, what were people thinking? And I'm like, that's exactly right.
Well, there are a couple of angles to what you're talking about. First, it was an uncertain time because the Vietnam War had ended for all intents and purposes in 75. And you had Watergate leading to Nixon's resignation in 74. You had inflation. The bicentennial comes and it's a chance for us to celebrate. And by 78, you have so many things in the culture that maybe subconsciously are being used to suppress all that uncertainty. Disco was fun. It was just fun. The beat, the music.
Well, it was liberating as well, culturally as well as musically.
And if you think about it, Tim, it was popularized by Saturday Night Fever in 1977. But I think people forget that movie is dark. One of his friends dies at the end of the movie. It's a dark movie. It's not a fun movie. Nonetheless, the soundtrack was #1 the following year. And also in popular culture, to kind of push away this uncertainty, Hollywood went to the 50s. Grease, American Hot Wax, the Buddy Holly story, Happy Days had been on for a few years, and it's a top show by 78. You also had Animal House, which was set in the early 60s. And you know as well as I do, when a movie is set in the past, what do they do to remind you it's set in the past? Music. So the soundtrack reminded you of a simpler time. The costumes, the hairstyles, the references, a simpler time. When you juxtapose the disco craze with American Hot Wax seems kind of quaint. The beginning of rock and roll. Disco was much more flashy. Donna Summer was the queen of disco. There was a movie called Thank God It's Friday, which depicted a night in an LA nightclub, disco themed all around. It's just what it was. And it was a craze for a few years. By the early 80s, disco had died out.
But again, also this backdrop of I wouldn't call it sort of anything goes, but right. I mean, the whole evolving of disco music and just culturally as well, though, too. As listeners of this show know, during my formative years, not only did I become a Yankee fan in Northern New Jersey, but there was this soccer boom going on, especially led by those Cosmos in the Giant Stadium era, right? So this also leads me to ask this question, given the evolution of it. Why baseball for you, right? As an impressionable thing growing up, and then a revisit as you get older to kind of look back and put it through the frame of 1978.
Well, baseball was such a prevalent part of my childhood. Every kid played Little League, or every boy. I think there was one girl on one of our teams, but every boy played Little League. And we all read books. We read these big biographies that had, like, I say big, I don't mean big in terms of page numbers, but I mean in terms of big print, let's say, when you're in third grade, fourth grade, and you're reading these 50-page biographies, when you have what we had Arrow books at like every couple of months in our school, and we would check off the books that we wanted. Our parents would give us money, and we'd give the money to the teacher. Invariably, every boy in the class would check off a biography of a sports figure, and not necessarily baseball. It could be NFL, NBA, but primarily sports. I played Little League. I loved reading about baseball. My formative years, I learned about baseball through a book called The Story of Baseball by John Rosenberg, which was produced by Random House for 20 years. They always updated it every couple of years. And it was from 1962 to 1981, the publishing history, I believe. That's the publishing history. And this book chronicled the history of the national pastime. It was almost as big as a coffee table book, and the chapters were 2-3 pages. And that's where I learned about the Black Sox. That's where I learned about Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth and Hank Greenberg and Mickey Mantle. And that's a great introduction for a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old to the national pastime's rich legacy. And from there, I would read those books I got from Arrow, which were also produced by Random House. And as I got older, would read more substantive biographies. There was just something in the culture. I don't know if baseball has the same hold on the culture now. I suspect that it doesn't. So when I started to engage in book writing, I had written a long article for the New York State Bar Association's Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law Journal, Sports Law Journal, about the Brooklyn Dodgers. And there was a bar called the Brooklyn Dodger in Brooklyn, and the LA Dodgers, and Major League Baseball did not like the idea of this bar's name. And this is late 80s, early 90s. So they sued for trademark infringement, but the judge said, you abandoned the city, you abandoned the trademark. Brooklyn Dodgers have nothing to do with the LA Dodgers. You don't use the name in any significant way in commerce. So the bar wins. There's no infringement. And I remembered that case from law school, and I always liked it. So I wrote about it. And then when I started to think about writing books, I said, geez, I think there would be a book about the Brooklyn Dodgers, not just about this case, but the cultural elements, movies, TV, plays, radio. There hasn't been a really good Dodgers book in many, many years. And I can also get fans to be interviewed. So those were my two approaches to, you say, what do you do that's different? That's what you do. You find out what's not being done. There hadn't been fan interviews since Peter Goldenbach's book, Bums, which was, I think, in the 80s. And no one had tackled the popular culture element. And I said, those are 2 chapters right there. I get 7 more chapters, 9 chapters, 9 innings in a baseball game. That's how I'm going to approach this book. And from there, I just fell in love with writing and research. I was always writing articles, and I loved writing and research in high school and college, but this was just on a much bigger level. And I said, I'm just going to keep doing this. For 78, same principle. What's not being done? 77 had been done. The 77 Yankees had been done in a book called Ladies and Gentlemen, the Bronx is Burning. And a lot of things were covered in that book. Where was 78? Couldn't find anything except for Roger Kahn's book, October Men, but my approach was more global. And that's when I decided to pitch it to the workshop. It sat on the sidelines for a few years. And then, as I say, when I was looking around for another project, I said, let's give this one a shot. Let me rework the proposal and let's send it out and see what kind of response we get.
All right. So what do you remember as a kid about certain elements of the 78 season? And then how do you juxtapose that with the lens of maturity and a research angle looking backward on that? I guess the question really is, how aligned, similar, accurate were those first and then second impressions of the story?
I remembered the headlines. I remembered the Yankees winning and things like that. I think the most prominent part of that season for me, it was my first year at sleepaway camp, and the head counselor, when they had the flag raising ceremony every morning, would talk about the scores from the night before. And we got to a point in the summer where he would say, Pete Rose hit in his 25th consecutive game, 32nd consecutive game, 39th consecutive game. It was getting up there. And I just remember that so prominently. And then wondering as a kid, and maybe you went through this too, Tim, why would a player leave? Why would you leave, especially if you're on a good team? Why would Pete Rose leave? And when I did the research and went to the newspaper archives and saw he just wasn't happy, there was some kind of conflict between him and Reds management. Sometimes a player leaves because of money. You don't understand that when you're a kid. I grew up a Mets fan. Why would Tom Seaver leave the Mets? I didn't find out until years later that it was because of something that Dick Young said in a column about Tom Seaver's wife. And also for the weeks leading up to Tom Seaver leaving in June of 77, they were negotiating, but they couldn't come to terms on price. This is one of the best pitchers in baseball, and they couldn't come to terms on money. They're talking about a few dollars. I couldn't comprehend that then, why someone would leave. And even as an adult, Tim, I look back and say, you're far apart. You're letting a legend leave because of a few dollars. When Dick Young wrote what he wrote, there was no turning back from that, because
Seaver there was rarely turning back from what Dick Young said. I remember his being chased by soccer fans when he went to a soccer game and kind of capitulated to the fact that this Cosmos thing was a real thing. But yes, I mean, not uncommon for Dick Young.
But Rose's hitting streak just dominated the news, and I thought that was such a prominent story. I wanted to put in the book about the night that the streak ended, but also in the off season, chart the genesis of him leaving. And you'll see that in the book. Why did he leave? Why did he choose Philadelphia? He had so many other teams he could have gone to. There was a rumor that he was going to the Mets, that the Mets were throwing their hat in the ring. So here's a guy with so many options, goes to Philly, and sure enough, Philly becomes a contender. And in 1980, they win it all.
All right. So what stands out in your mind as totemic during this season? I mean, obviously, there's a number of Hall of Fame worthy moments that occur, and you mentioned a couple of them. But in your mind, what give us a sense of like what? Obviously, the Yankees defending their championship is a story. The Bucky Dent dramatic home run in the one-game playoff in Boston, in my mind, perhaps in yours as a kid, was kind of one of those "where were you when that happened" moments, at least in the New York area. But aside from sort of the obvious, memorial parks, so to speak, of events, what are some of the other sort of underlying things that maybe people don't sort of remember or really recognize that was going on or happened in 78 that perhaps you discovered anew or added more flavor or color to that you didn't know before?
In baseball or elsewhere?
Well, let's talk baseball, but certainly segue, elsewhere too, if you'd like.
Well, when I did the research about Billy Martin leaving the manager's job and being replaced by Bob Lemon, I had no idea how many Yankees were dissatisfied, how they didn't want to be there the following year because of the drama that was going on in the clubhouse among the players and management and so on. That it was just not a fun place for them. And I had no clue that was going on. Reggie getting suspended. If I had known that, I forgot that. Reggie was suspended for 5 games. So there was more going on than just a comeback and then Bucky Dent and Reggie Jackson hitting home runs in that playoff and then beating the Dodgers in the World Series. That was an eye-opener for me. And fortunately, because I live in the New York area, I have access to the New York Public Library, which has microfilm of every single New York City newspaper. So I was able to go back to the New York Post and juxtapose that against what I could find in databases that allowed me to research the New York Times and the New York Daily News and get more quotes. The Dodgers conflict, I had no idea about the Dodgers conflict. I was in the New York area. And even though I was a Mets fan, I obviously followed the Yankees. And
you couldn't not, right? Because you're just too dominant on all the sports pages and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's your story. It's a New York story. It belongs to New York. Yes, it's a baseball story, but it's a New York story because you're the one, dialing in to Channel 11 every night, watching Jerry Gerard on WPIX give his recap. You're the one reading the Star Ledger, or if you're in Bergen County, the Bergen Record, or if you're on Long Island, Newsday, you're with the team day in and day out. So you understand what's going on. You understand when someone's injured. Ron Guidry going 25-3. I mean, that was just an outstanding performance, a legendary performance that year. So it's very exciting when a team from your city gets to the World Series. It makes you feel a part of it. And I think for that memory of watching on Channel 11, that came back to me in a very significant way, almost palpable. But learning about the business side of baseball and how all you see isn't all there is. People have a great job and they leave it. You don't know why they leave. Why would they leave that job? Well, they leave it for personal reasons. They're stressed out. They want something else. They don't like the commute. It's the same thing in baseball. Why would you leave the New York Yankees? World Series champions in 1977. It's now 78. Why would you leave? They can't handle the stress. They'd rather play in a smaller market where they don't have the press in their face every 2 seconds, where there are only 2 papers maximum, not all these different reporters with microphones and lights. So that became an eye-opener. And I don't want to be a doom and gloom guy and say, oh, it's all business, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by not recognizing, yes, at the end of the day, they're performing a task and you're paying to see them perform that task. And if you're at the ballpark, you're paying for food. Somebody has to buy the food, make a profit so they can employ people. It's a business, period.
All right, what's this? Royal Retros. All right, longtime fans of this show may remember a little site that we used to promote the heck out of called 503 Sports. Well, not only are they still around, they are now known as Royal Retros. RoyalRetros.com, the king of throwbacks. And like the name implies, the highest quality jerseys and hats and apparel and all kinds of stuff related to various teams and leagues and situations that we love to obsess about here on this show. And I'm talking about getting jerseys with your name and number on the back of them, customized to your liking for the WHA or old NHL hockey teams that may not exist anymore. Perhaps it's a Federal League team from way back or a Negro League team. Maybe you're just enamored with the various football leagues of the past, like the Arena League or the All-American Football Conference or the original UFL, United Football League. Yes, you can get all of those teams in all kinds of colors, away jerseys, home jerseys. You want to put your name on them. You want to make sure you got the official patch on the side. All of those things and more at RoyalRetros.com. And I'm not kidding, friends. You go there, you want to find that Cleveland Barons jersey to wear and show. Hey, you're maybe a Colorado Avalanche fan and you want to represent the Quebec Nordiques from where they came in the arena to show your heritage and your love and knowledge of the history of that franchise. You can do that and more. And I'm talking across football and basketball and baseball and hockey. and you name it. All kinds of great stuff for you to find and buy and purchase and wear proudly from Royal Retros. That's royalretros.com. And of course, we have a promo code for you. We want to save you money from all these great things. And here's that code. It's SEATS, SEATS, promo code SEATS for all of your purchases at royalretros.com. Check them out. You'll be glad you did. We love them. And our friend Destin Alameda there out in Portland, Oregon, we appreciate his and their sponsorship of this show. And now, back to our conversation. Tell me about baseball in this sort of environment of the late 70s, right? Baseball is still largely a dominant sport, and also media, right? Because the media landscape dramatically different, right? There's a lot less choice out there, and baseball is very much a staple still of traditional weekend, and even now with ABC around this time, Monday night games.
Right.
It was still very much the word dominant keeps coming back in my head, sport, when it came to televised sports in this country. And it still was very much one of the pinnacles of attendance as well as audience on television.
Well, Tim, George Will said the best baseball players are the ones who played when you were 12 years old. So if we're playing a Stratomatic Hall of Fame edition, or even just any edition, against somebody who is in their 70s, we're not going to pick the same players. I'll pick Tom Seaver, and somebody else might pick Bob Gibson if they're 20 years older. I'm going to pick Dave Parker. Other people might pick Harmon Killebrew. So there's a great romance to the game, obviously, when you're a kid. To put it in perspective, it's the thing that was the most shocking for me, talking about the Bucky Dent game, was it was played in the afternoon. That would never happen today. It would be at night, prime time, big hullabaloo, big marketing to maximize the audience, etc. There were afternoon games. You didn't have that, or you don't have that anymore. That was a shocker. I don't know if I'm getting a little off topic, but the culture of baseball as a dominant sport started to fade probably by the 2000s. And we had basketball come in, and Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and then Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the 90s. Football started to become much more entrenched globally. Kids didn't want to play baseball anymore. But when you and I were growing up, it was unheard of that you wouldn't play Little League or wiffle ball in the backyard. And if you grew up in a city, you probably played stickball. There was just a different culture. It was passed down from generation to generation. A large part of that, I think, is because of the announcers. The announcers played the game. Ralph Kiner announced Mets games, and he would talk about pitchers that he faced. Phil Rizzuto, as I said, would talk about the Yankee teams of the 50s. He would always have some tale about Mickey Mantle or another teammate. I'm sure this happened across the country with the announcers. And when you have someone like Vince Scully, who was with the Dodgers for decades, in the late 70s, he can pontificate about Drysdale and Koufax. He can even go back to his early days in Brooklyn and talk about Jackie Robinson. So that romance, that continuity has kind of shifted. I hope it hasn't evaporated totally, but there was just something much more tangible with baseball's hold on the culture. And I think because of TV and also some other factors, baseball's a game of failure. If you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're in the Hall of Fame. If you hit the ball safely 3 out of 10 times, you're going to Cooperstown, most probably. That's a success. A 300 hitter is a success. And as we've moved forward as a society, kids don't want to fail. They don't want the opportunity to fail. And
yeah, it's also, and we also had like 3 television networks, right? I mean, and ABC had a Monday night game. They were doing like the All-Star game, I think, as well as part of that. And NBC, and I think they also did if I remember correctly, some with Howard Cosell in the booth.
Right.
Never a dull moment there. The league championship series is of both leagues, and then NBC got the World Series, and I think did this sort of Saturday game of the week and stuff. And the game of the week, I think people have to remember too. That was kind of like that was. I mean, I know ESPN has its Sunday night game of the week. I mean, it is completely different where the
Right.
aperture of media was so much smaller, yet because of that, so much more pronounced because of the viewership of the only the limited options and stuff. So anytime these games were on the air, and you mentioned before, like the Bucky Dent 1-game playoff, in the afternoon.
And now Bucky will step back in with a count of 1 ball and 1 strike. Runners at first and second, 2 out. Here in the 7th inning, the Yankees are trailing 2-0. Dent is the key man. Stretched by Torres, the set, the kick, and the pitch. Hit deep to left field. This one may be off the wall, maybe in the screen. Home run! Home run for Bucky Dent. Home run, and the Yankees lead it 3-2. Just in the net in left field, and the entire bench is out on the playing field. The dugout has emptied, waiting for Bucky Dent, who has put the Yankees out in front. 3-2. 3-2. The Yankees lead it on the Dent home run.
And Frank Perez gets the ball up against a Bucky Dent. Bucky Dent hammered the ball into the net here in Fenway Park.
Well, it was a Monday. It had to happen before Tuesday's game started. But, in essence, even, by broadcasting that game locally and nationally, that was an event, right? People would kind of like alter their days, 4:00 in the afternoon or 3:00 to watch it, because it was one of the handful of television options available, and it was by nature of that.
I believe
an event.
I believe it was also on a Jewish holiday. So when Jews in the New York area came back from synagogue, they could watch the game. Those who weren't ultra observant could watch. And I think there's also something to be said about how easy it was to follow the game. You had a 3 out of 5 playoff and a 4 out of 7 World Series. There was no wild card. The All-Star game didn't mean anything. It was an exhibition. The players wore the uniforms of their own teams. In New York, you'll recall, we had the Mayor's Trophy game. That game hasn't existed for quite some time. It just became too logistically difficult to fly the players in, and then they had to fly back to where they were. And they said, it's just not worth it. Interleague play. When you and I were growing up, going to the
non-existent
was exciting because the National League played the American League, and the American League had the DH and the NL didn't. And there were all these idiosyncrasies that when you're in an AL ballpark, you're using the DH, and when you're in an NL ballpark, you're not. And you just had it was a different perspective. Now with the wild cards, it's just so difficult to follow. The playoffs seem to be interminable. We're playing the World Series in November. It's just becoming almost too big to handle. And a friend of mine years ago, a Phillies fan, said, I made this argument to him, and he said, that by every metric, baseball is more successful than it's ever been. They're playing abroad. The revenues are up. Player salaries are up. Ratings are up. And I said to him, how many World Series games did you watch from beginning to end? He said, none. I said, how many World Series games did your kids watch beginning to end? None. Because it goes on too late. In 1978, you rushed home from school. You did your homework as fast as you could. You did it before dinner. You did it after dinner, so that you might not be able to stay up for the whole game, but you could stay up for most of it. And you did that because you wanted to be part of it. But now the game starts so late, Tim, that it's becoming almost impossible for the everyday person to go straight through. And with all the technology that we have, some people say, "Oh, I'll just get the highlights tomorrow. I don't need to see 9 innings. I just want to see when they score. So I'll get the highlights tomorrow." I think we lose something.
A lot of little quirks and idiosyncrasies about the 78 season. For example, I think people forget in August, I think of that year, The umpires, the major league umpires, struck for a day. I think there was some kind of violation with their contract. And there was amateur umpires for that day. I think it was in late August somewhere. And there was a restraining order and that kind of stuff. I mean, all these, little, and major events, right? I mean, things like, Pete Rose getting his 3,000th hit relatively earlier in the season, right? I mean, this is a guy who's that's probably, confirmed him as the quote unquote hit king.
Yes.
Which he, carried for the rest of his life as his title to never to be, taken away. I mean, Willie McCovey, breaking 500 home runs. I mean, you have to remember with in 74 with Hank Aaron, in the mid 700s, 500 home runs was I don't know if it was a distant second but clearly this is the gap between Aaron and McCovey, but 500 home runs is a major accomplishment.
Right.
And Gaylord Perry, right? I mean, getting 3,000 strikeouts is, a hallmark achievement. And all these guys, with the exception of Rose, who should qualify if you take out certain other aspects of his life, right, are, these are embellishing or confirming events in greatness and all-star, worthiness.
Well, sure. You had Aaron, Ruth, Mays. McCovey was in the shadow of Mays, for lack of a better phrase, but he was beloved in San Francisco, and he was a gentle giant. He was so powerful. Getting 500 home runs is an unbelievable accomplishment. And let's talk about the people getting to the Hall of Fame. Eddie Matthews, 500 plus home runs in his career. What about Joe McCarthy? We were talking about continuity. Joe McCarthy dying in January of 78. And that when somebody dies who is a legend, we automatically start thinking about their time. So people started thinking about the McCarthy Yankee teams of decades ago and the glory that they brought to New York and to baseball. So there was so much going on. Tom Seaver's no-hitter, of course. And Tom Seaver said it wasn't even one of his best games. It just happened to be that it was a no-hitter. And unfortunately for Mets fans, it happened when he was in a Reds uniform, but I'm glad he got it. As you said, Gaylord Perry. There were so many colorful ball players of that era that you knew who McCovey was, you knew who he played for, and you knew who Gaylord Perry was, you knew who Tom Seaver was. Rose stood out. These were icons. They were just absolute icons. And what's happened in the game is, because of expansion, because of interleague play, it's getting harder for me to discern the different people. And they change teams so often now that it becomes a little more challenging. Maybe it's easier when you're a kid and you have all the baseball cards in front of you. But I'm glad you mentioned McCovey, because I think he's overlooked. And I believe there's a biography coming out regarding McCovey this year, which I hope to read.
So give me a sense from your memories as a kid, as well as your look back, about sort of the overlap between, I guess, the entertainment dynamic of 78 and that of baseball, right? Because you remember, too, there was, the economy wasn't all that sterling during this time, right? So the effect on, gassing up the car and driving to a major league ballpark, it wasn't necessarily an inexpensive proposition. You look at like New York, I mean, probably less so at Shea, but certainly in New York, the courage it took to go to the ballpark in the South Bronx, given the disrepair and worse of the city, as well as the South Bronx specifically. It wasn't necessarily golden times, so to speak, right? I mean, there's a lot of challenges, I guess, and it was not necessarily easy to escape to the ballpark with ease per se. And frankly, there's a lot of other distractions, I think, going on entertainment wise, that, arguably could have been a challenge to baseball. Like I said, in the New York area and in certain pockets of the country, I mean, the soccer thing was kind of taken off, and challenging. I mean, there was growing up in New York, you would see. I remember vividly a cartoon. I think who was the editorial cartoonist at the time of the Daily News would showed that the Cosmos were outdrawing both the Mets and the Yankees during a weekend. I think it was either in 70. I think it was in 78 actually, when all three of them were home on the same date. Right, so it was a crazy time, and I wasn't necessarily that baseball was on its healthiest trajectory.
No, but you also had television. People saying, why should I go to the ballpark when I can sit on my couch and watch the game, watch instant replays? I have the best seat in the house. Now, you and I know there's nothing like being there. There's nothing like being there. But as you said, the economy wasn't in the best shape. People might be afraid to go to the South Bronx. Some people can't afford to go to the game because it's not just the ticket, whether you're talking about 1978 or 2025, it's the ticket, it's the travel, it's the food, it's the souvenirs, it's everything.
Well, it's
else.
also, I'm sorry, it's also the escape, right? And I think maybe that's where the word I was struggling with, right? Is that there's no question that, I mean, you look at disco as probably the ultimate example of this, but there was a desire for escapism from all the trials and travails of just living and questioning around the country and certain cities going to disrupt, all that kind of stuff, right? So in some respects, right, a baseball game is quintessentially Americana and maybe offers that kind of escape. But that, you could also say culturally that maybe that's not the kind of escape we're looking for because we don't know what America's all about anymore. Maybe Americana ain't it.
Look at the TV shows that were popular. You had Happy Days, which is set in the late 50s. You had Fantasy Island, The Love Boat. Every week you're going on a cruise. Every week you're living vicariously on some tropical paradise, somebody else's fantasy. And there's always a moral lesson at the end. Vegas premiered in 78. Robert Urich running around, tackling people, shooting people, defending people, protecting people, solving crimes. What's more glamorous than Las Vegas in the late 70s when they show that montage and it's the marquees with Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. It's just total escapism. And there was something to be said for escapism. And certainly a hockey game, a basketball game, a football game, a soccer game, a baseball game provides us that escape. We cheer when our team wins. We mourn when our team loses. There's a vicarious thrill, certainly, that we get. And you can't replicate that. If you're at the ballpark and your team wins or your team comes back, there's just a magical, palpable feeling in the air. But now, more than ever before, we have so many different entertainment options that it's getting harder and harder for sports to compete, I believe. And the ticket prices are getting higher and higher. And that's unfortunate. I don't think we're coming to the end, but I know people who say, I just am not going to pay that kind of money to go to a game. It doesn't mean as much anymore.
Do you think 78 was, and again, this is through the biased lenses of two guys growing up in northern New Jersey at the time as kids. Okay, so put that aside, but it's a part of this question. Are we deluding ourselves, the two of us, in bending a lot of this story towards what was going on in New York and the Yankees specifically and their championship run and the drama of the Boston Massacre, which kind of set up the one-game drama later in that season, all that stuff? And Bucky Dent and all that kind of stuff. Are we a kind of outliers in that? Or is, if we were growing up elsewhere or looking at this sort of maybe more objectively, we would still come to the same conclusion that a lot of this kind of maybe culturally with disco, and that's the center of disco was New York, certainly. And the troubles in the South Bronx, which was a great example of what was going on in the country, forward to the, the 2 years after Ford telling the city to drop dead, according to the New York Post, all that stuff. Are we a little biased in bending a lot of this history of this season around the New York Yankees and stuff? Or were they truly synonymous with it, given all the drama that they were generating and all the and their ultimate victory and stuff? It kind of seems like it would pass muster to the more objective crowd. I don't know.
I do think it would pass muster. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written the other stories, Pete Rose, Tom Seaver, LA Dodgers, etc. It is a Yankees book in a certain degree. But if you took what happened to the Yankees and you transposed it to the White Sox or the Braves or the Tigers, and they had the same drama, the same players, the same comeback, then I'd be writing about that in that paradigm.
And maybe also it would be probably more just of a baseball story than more a cultural one, right?
Well,
because I mean, New York is culturally was in the driver's seat for better or for worse in the latter part of the Saturday Night Live we mentioned earlier. I mean, all that stuff, right, was emanating out of New York, whether you liked it or not.
It still is. But my approach to the book, Tim, when I write about a year, so this is my third book about a year. I've written about 62 and 66. My objective is to write a book that you would read if you were going in a time machine back to that year. So my book would give you a taste of what baseball was like, what life was like, what was going on in popular culture, what was going on in political headlines, etc. Now, if I wanted to write the book, if I wrote the book I wanted to write, the book would be 700 pages. So you can't do that practically. So I just tried to distill everything down and find the best quotes, the best stories that I could to tell the story of 78 with baseball as the spine, specifically the Yankees, but not exclusively so. And certainly New York in the late 70s dominated culture. You had Saturday Night Fever set in a Brooklyn disco. You had, as you said, Saturday Night Live premiering in 1975. Ford telling the city to drop dead, although those weren't his exact words.
Of course not. It was the New York Post. Let's be clear.
And then you have the 3 years in a row where the Yankees go to the World Series. So those are great stories, all set around New York. Now you complement that with the blizzard, and the blizzard was epic. But I did not limit myself to the blizzard in the New York area. I also talked about New England because they got hammered as well. But when you talk about the blizzards in New York, I mean, I haven't done the research, but I have to believe the 78 blizzard is in the top 10.
No, there are a lot of people actually that suggest that NASCAR grew up during that blizzard because there was nothing for people in the Northeast and New England to do on that weekend, and they watched literally as we record this, this year's edition of the Daytona 500, and it became the most watched, and it really opened a lot of people's eyes outside of the solid South, if you will, that this wasn't a regional thing. And what was this spectacle? And these guys are nuts. And wow, and so, yeah, I mean, the blizzard was a impactful thing that was, that had its mark on a bunch of different things.
Right. I agree with that.
So if there are any sort of quirky or idiosyncratic or completely ignored or little hidden gems in your narrative here about 78, is there anything without sort of, we want people to buy the book for goodness sake, but is there anything in all of that, whether it was a rabbit hole of research or, 5 hours of YouTube that you just didn't know that you had, that you discovered or came across that either you couldn't believe or was is something that you think should be remembered but has been, I don't know, steamrolled over in the passage of time?
Sure. In baseball, Sparky Anderson and Pete Rose leaving the Reds. In popular culture, The White Shadow premiering, a quality show that did not have a long broadcast history.
Love The White Shadow. Love it.
You talk to men of a certain age and they light up. They remember it. And they remember the episodes. They remember the storylines, the characters. It
Not
was
funny, Salami. Keep it down.
It was one of the first shows, maybe the first show, where they took Black characters and made them multi-dimensional. You knew the personalities of the players by the end of the pilot. And that was unheard of in broadcast television. Gwyneth Paltrow's father, Bruce Paltrow, spearheaded The White Shadow, and he was really the driving force creatively behind Ken Howard as Ken Reeves, taking this ragtag group of wise guys in the inner city and shaping them into an organized team that could really be proficient. And they injected emotion, they injected dimension into these characters. I haven't seen a show like that regarding high school kids in a while, but people should go back and look at it, because it's a glimpse into quality television. When you look at 78, and people might say, well, Three's Company wasn't exactly quality. Well, Three's Company served a purpose, and the purpose was to entertain and distract. White Shadow was a little more realistic in terms of the subject matter. This player is an alcoholic, this player can't read, et cetera, et cetera. So there were a lot of social issues they covered, and I think people might be surprised at how much depth there was to the show.
Yeah, a lot of it holds up, and it
sure.
it certainly should have gone on longer in my mind. But so all right, so what do you want readers to glean out of 1978 in terms of its either pivotal nature or representative effect on the game of baseball, right? I think it's not necessarily obvious to people that maybe it had some kind of trajectory. I think people might remember some of the more dramatic events of it, but what would you sort of affix to 1978 as pivotal, or maybe as a mark of something that was changing or evolving in the game because of culture or because of the game itself, or both?
Well, certainly it was evolving. McCovey hitting his 500th home run. The other side of that coin is, wow, he's been playing a long time. How much longer is he going to be playing? When you see these veteran players and they're reaching a certain age, you wonder, okay, how 5 years, 3 years? That's an evolution. Who's going to be the next star? Who's going to be the next slugger? As far as baseball as a whole, I think it's one of baseball's greatest years. The comeback against the Red Sox, Boston being ahead 14 games, and the Yankees inching along despite the turmoil. Bob Lemon coming in and people saying there's an ease in the clubhouse now. It's a little calmer now. It's a little easier now. Despite Reggie being suspended, despite all the obstacles in their way, and then going to Fenway Park and winning 4 straight in what became the Boston Massacre was just a delight for New York Yankees fans, and also a surprise to everybody else. And that's what makes great sports. It's drama, it's dramatic moments. Could they do it? Could they really catch the Red Sox? Could they win? Could they beat? And the Red Sox were, touted as going all the way in July. And Jim Rice had a fantastic year in 78, just dominating American League pitching. So it seemed like a foregone conclusion in mid-July. They're going to the World Series. And the Yankees thwarted that. And it's another chapter in the saga of the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. But I hope people glean from it, Tim, that beyond the Yankees, it was a fantastic baseball year. It was a great year to be a baseball fan. Whether you were 8 or 88, there was so much going on in the national pastime. And when people read this book, they'll find out stories they didn't know before. They'll get context. And my hope is that they'll be curious enough to research further, that they'll read more books about the Yankees and the Red Sox, more books about Tom Seaver, more books about Pete Rose, more books about the movies that came out that year, about disco, about television, and so on.
Yeah, and I think, in retrospect, you could also look at this as kind of an example. I wouldn't pinpoint specifically the year per se, but certainly the era in which 78 was amidst, as sort of I don't know, a loss of innocence on a lot of different fronts,
Yeah.
culturally, certainly, but in baseball too. I mean, I think people, for example, I mean, you think about 78. I mean, only 3 seasons later, right? We had moved on. Well, obviously, there's a big baseball strike that occurred, but there was also the evolution of the playoffs, right? From it being the top 2 teams in each division, and then literally only 4 teams in the playoffs, right? To adding another layer to create a championship series, or a division, a league championship kind of environment in order to get to the World Series, right? So there's clearly itching to get more playoffs going, and and I think certainly too, you look at the early 80s with the advent of cable television, right, which created a lot more media outlets and stuff, right? So if you're looking for a period of time, and maybe 78 was sort of a slice of that, or a piece of that, right? The notion that what baseball and sports and cultural look like, there's clearly a lot of things that happen in the years of the wake of this season, or this era, that portend a lot more change and the beginnings of next generations of things.
Right. And we look back to Field of Dreams with James Earl Jones, who said baseball marks the time. And it has. No matter what's been going on in the world, you can always go to the ballpark and catch a game. You can always go to the ballpark with a friend and schmooze and talk about current events, talk about your job, talk about your life, while taking in a ball game. There's something magical about baseball. The pace, the longevity, the fact that there is no end, the fact that it's the only sport, I believe, where the defense always has the ball. So there's so much romance in it. And when you think back on everything the country has been through since 1876, with the National League, and the American League, I think, was born in 1901, baseball has always been there. Teams have moved, right? Teams have moved. The A's moved from Philly to Kansas City to Oakland and eventually to Las Vegas, but they've always been there. And I think when I worry about the future of the national pastime, I just watched that speech and I said, yeah, people will come. People may tune in now. They may turn on YouTube, and they may turn on, whatever outlet hosts the games. But it's been there. You mentioned the cable TV boom of the 80s. America's team was the Atlanta Braves, because Ted Turner put the Braves on the Superstation. The most popular baseball team in North Dakota was the Atlanta Braves, because they could watch the Atlanta team on WTBS. So there was an evolution about to take place, an expansion of baseball about to take place, not just with teams, but just the media reach, the merchandising, etc. And I love baseball. I love baseball history. It was a privilege to write this book. I'm so glad that it's going to be out there. People can go to Amazon and order a pre-publication copy now. You don't have to wait till it's released in April. You can order now. And like I said, my biggest hope is that when people finish reading it, they get curious enough to do some more research on their own.
All right, last question. You hinted at it. Where do you see the game now, in retrospect, given all that you've learned and or remembered, or both, about 78 and it's approaching 50 years now, or so. Do you think it's still in the firmament of American sports, or do you worry about its future? I mean, there have been plenty of people on this show who certainly worry about it, and in terms of its competitiveness, and are the rules changes a little too late? So many other distractions and other sports and all that kind of stuff. Or do you think it will always be part of the American sports landscape, and somewhat dominantly so?
It will always be part of the landscape. I'm not crazy about some of these rule changes. The ghost runner on second, I'm adamantly against. But other people have argued, but that's part of baseball. Baseball is evolutionary. There wasn't a DH before there was a DH. The mound wasn't lowered until 1969 because Denny McClain and Bob Gibson had dominant seasons in 68. So baseball is a game of evolution, one might argue. We have 162 games, and however many games are in the playoffs, then 7 games in the World Series. They're not marketing the players like they were. We don't have the same love for these teams. We don't have the same adoration of these icons like we once did. But again, that's baseball needing to adapt to the business side and needing to figure out, okay, what do we do? They've already figured out how to adapt to gambling, which I never thought I'd see when in any sport. But now we're going to have a team in Las Vegas in a few years. Never thought that was possible 50 years ago. So I think baseball will be here. It's going to adapt. It's learning to adapt. You and I might not agree with it, but we're not the decision makers. So we'll have to live with whatever decisions they make regarding rules, regarding expansion if they get 2 more teams. So it'll be interesting to see, but I don't think that it's dying. I don't think that it's going anywhere. What I fear the most is people not following, not going to the ballpark. You don't have to go every day. There are 81 games. You don't even have to go to 10 games. But do you go once a year? Do you go twice a year just to get out of the house, just to support your team? I think those little things are important to just remind yourself how magical going to a sporting event can be.
Would you still consider yourself a fan? Last question.
Yes, definitely. I wouldn't be writing the books if I weren't a fan.
All right, there you have it. Thank you to David, and it was a fun time to be alive, I will tell you. 1978, not only for baseball, but just generally. All kinds of crazy stuff, and you can look it up, as they say. Just an amazing glimpse of what was going on in this country and on the baseball diamond, and I appreciate him coming on and chatting up about it and the book, which, of course, you can get now. And it is called Baseball in America in the Disco Era. And that's subtitled 1978. And you can find it wherever good books are found. It is published by our pals at the University of Nebraska Press. And of course, you can purchase it the best and most expedient way through our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode 388 with David Krell and myself, and you'll find some handy links that will take you to Amazon. And the Kindle version or the hardcover version will be yours as fast as humanly possible. And we'll get a couple of shekels or rubles or pierogies or whatever of value of referral love. There you go, for your doing so. We appreciate that. That helps keep our lights on. And there you go. Let's see. We want to remind you that while you're on our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com, you can also check out our merch section. Great fun friends there with lots of great wares there. There's TeePublic, has got some shirts and garb for you. Our friends at oldschoolshirts.com, Royal Retros, of course, Yinzelvania is there. More to come. Just check them out and tool around. You might find some stuff you might like. And again, every purchase helps keep our little hamster wheel turning, keep the power going, so we can get these shows out to you each and every week. Our email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Our various socials, you'll find us on Blue Sky at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You'll find us on X at goodseatsstill, and you'll find us just about everywhere else. That's Instagram, YouTube, you name it, at goodseatsstillavailable. What else? Our friend Jerry Payne has done his audio excellence once again this week. We appreciate that. Don't forget to call him in the morning at Extra 106.3 in Atlanta, WFOM FM down there in the Battery with the as he produces the Morning Extra Show with Tug and Los. Call up and crank call him and tell him that Tim from Chicago has a question for the guys. See what he says. See what he does. If he's not falling asleep already. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Jerry. We appreciate it as always. And thank you for listening. We cannot thank you enough. And stay tuned to your feeds. Lots of great stuff. Tell your friends, will you? Have them sign up and give us some 5-star ratings and add us to their feeds and all that stuff. Hopefully they will enjoy the stuff that we put out for you each and every week that hopefully you do too. Thanks very much. We'll see you soon. Bye.